Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the English Globe. It's always a real pleasure to have you with us again. Whether you are listening from your home, traveling to work, studying late at night, or enjoying a quiet walk, we are truly grateful that you chose to spend this time learning English with us. At the English Globe, our mission is simple and clear. We help you improve your English by discussing meaningful global topics in a calm, clear, and educational way. Every episode is designed to build your vocabulary, improve your listening skills, and help you understand the world more confidently through the English language. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's begin today's thoughtful discussion together.
Yes, welcome everyone. Today's topic is both interesting and very relevant in today's global economy. We are going to talk about Brazil versus Mexico and ask an important question. Who leads Latin America's economy? You may have heard these two countries mentioned often in the news, in economic reports, or in global discussions, but understanding why they are compared is not always easy. That's exactly why we are here today. In this episode, we will explore this topic step by step, using simple English and clear explanations, so you can learn not only about economics, but also how to talk about global issues with confidence.
Before we go deeper into the discussion, dear listeners, we would really love to hear from you. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The English Globe, if you haven't already. Your support helps us continue creating educational content for English learners around the world. Also, don't forget to leave a comment below and tell us where you are listening from today. Are you in Asia, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, or the Americas? And feel free to share your thoughts on today's topic. In your opinion, which country do you think plays a bigger role in Latin America's economy, Brazil, or Mexico?
Exactly. Your comments and opinions truly motivate us and help build a global learning community. Now, let's begin by understanding the bigger picture. Latin America is a large and diverse region made up of many countries with different cultures, languages, and economic systems. However, when economists talk about Latin America's economy, Brazil and Mexico often stand out. These two countries are the largest economies in the region, and they have a major influence on trade, industry, and regional growth. Understanding their roles helps us understand Latin America as a whole.
That's right, Julia. When we compare Brazil and Mexico, we are not saying that other Latin American countries are unimportant. Instead, we are focusing on scale and influence. Brazil and Mexico have very large populations, strong industrial sectors, and important trade relationships with the rest of the world. This makes them key players in shaping economic trends across the region. For English learners, this comparison is also a great opportunity to practice comparison language, such as larger than, more influential, similar to, and different from.
Now, let's talk about what economic leadership really means, because this is an abstract idea that can sound confusing at first. Economic leadership is not just about being rich. It includes several factors, such as the size of a country's economy, how much it trades with other countries, how many people live and work there, and how much influence it has in regional and global markets. These factors together help economists understand which countries guide economic direction and stability in a region.
One of the most common terms you will hear in this discussion is GDP, which means gross domestic product. GDP is simply the total value of all goods and services produced in a country in 1 year. It helps us understand how big an economy is. However, GDP alone does not tell the full story, which is why we also look at trade, population, productivity, and international connections. These ideas may sound technical, but they affect everyday life, including jobs, prices, education, and opportunities.
To make this more practical, imagine an economy as a living system. When an economy is strong and well-connected, businesses grow, people find jobs more easily, and governments can invest more in education and infrastructure. When an economy struggles, daily life becomes more difficult for ordinary people. This is why learning about economics is not only for experts. It helps all of us understand how the world around us works and how global changes can affect our own lives.
Brazil and Mexico are often compared because they represent two different economic models within the same region. Brazil has a vast internal market and rich natural resources, while Mexico has strong manufacturing industries and close trade connections with North America. These differences make the comparison even more interesting and useful for understanding how economies develop in different ways, even within the same region.
For our English learners, today's topic is also a great chance to focus on listening for main ideas rather than every single word. Try to understand the big message of what we are saying and notice how we define abstract nouns and explain complex ideas in simple language. This skill is very important for exams, podcasts, and real-life conversations in English.
Absolutely. At the English Globe, we believe that learning English is not just about grammar rules. It's about using English to understand global topics and express your ideas clearly. So as we continue this discussion, think about how these economic ideas connect to the world you live in and how you can talk about them in your own words.
Thank you for joining us today and being part of our global learning family. In the next part of this podcast, we will begin exploring Brazil's economic foundations and understand what makes it such an important force in Latin America. For now, take a moment to reflect on what economic leadership means and why comparing Brazil and Mexico helps us better understand the region as a whole.
Now that we understand why Brazil and Mexico are often compared, let's begin by looking closely at Brazil's economic foundations, starting with its size and population, because these two factors play a major role in shaping how an economy develops and how much influence it can have within a region like Latin America.
In simpler words, Brazil is a very big country, both in land and in people, and this size gives it many advantages, but also many responsibilities, because a large country needs strong systems to support millions of citizens, including jobs, education, healthcare, and transportation.
Brazil is the largest country in South America by land area, and it also has the largest population in Latin America, which means it has a huge internal market, and this causes businesses to focus not only on exports but also on selling products and services inside the country itself.
When a country has a large population, it means there are many workers and many consumers, so companies can produce goods, sell them locally, and grow without depending completely on foreign markets, which makes the economy more balanced in some ways.
Another important foundation of Brazil's economy is its natural resources, because Brazil is rich in resources such as fertile land, fresh water, forests, minerals, and energy sources. And these resources directly influence the types of industries that develop in the country.
This means that because Brazil has so much good land and natural wealth, it can produce many things by itself, including food, raw materials, and energy, which reduces the need to import everything from other countries.
One clear example of cause and effect can be seen in Brazilian agriculture, because Brazil's climate and land allow it to grow crops like soybeans, coffee, sugarcane, and corn, and as a result, agriculture has become a strong part of the national economy.
So because Brazil can grow a lot of food, it not only feeds its own population, but also exports agricultural products to many other countries, which brings income and strengthens its position in global markets.
In addition to agriculture, Brazil also has a large industrial sector, and this sector developed because the country wanted to process its own raw materials instead of exporting them in basic form, which created factories, jobs, and technical skills.
Industry simply means making things in factories, and in Brazil this includes cars, airplanes, machinery, steel, and many consumer goods that are used both inside the country and abroad.
Over time, Brazil also developed a strong services sector, which includes banking, education, healthcare, tourism, and technology. And this happened because as incomes increased, People demanded more services beyond basic needs.
In easy language, when people earn more money, they spend more on services like education, travel, communication, and financial support. And this helps the service sector grow naturally.
These three sectors, agriculture, industry, and services, together form the structure of Brazil's economy, and the balance between them helps explain why Brazil is considered an economic leader in Latin America.
So, when economists describe Brazil's economy, they often say it is diversified, which means it does not depend on only one type of activity, but instead earns money from many different areas.
Because of its size and economic diversity, Brazil plays a central role inside Latin America, and many smaller economies in the region are influenced by Brazil's growth, trade decisions, and economic stability.
This means that when Brazil's economy grows, neighboring countries often benefit through trade and investment. But when Brazil faces economic problems, the effects can also spread across the region.
Another important point is that Brazil is often seen as a voice for Latin America in international economic discussions because its large economy gives it visibility and influence in global forums.
In simple terms, Brazil is often invited to global economic meetings because it represents a large part of Latin America's economic activity, and its decisions can affect the region's future.
For English learners, this section is a good example of cause and effect language, such as because, as a result, and this leads to, which are very common when describing how economies work.
You may want to remember key vocabulary from this section, like population, natural resources, agriculture, industry, services, and diversified economy, because these words appear often in economic discussions.
Understanding Brazil's economic foundations helps us see why it holds such a strong position in Latin America, and it prepares us to compare it fairly with Mexico in later parts of this podcast.
Exactly, and as you listen, try to think about how size, resources, and economic structure connect with each other, because this way of thinking will help you understand not only Brazil, but any country's economy.
In the next part of our discussion, we will turn our attention to Mexico's economic foundations and explore how its economic model differs from Brazil's, while still playing a major role in Latin America. When we look at Mexico's economic foundations, one of the first things we must understand is its population and geographic position. Because Mexico has a large and active population, combined with a unique location that places it directly between Latin America and North America, and this situation has caused Mexico's economy to develop in a way that strongly connects production, labor, and trade with international markets, rather than relying only on domestic consumption.
To make this idea easier, you can imagine Mexico as a bridge between two major economic worlds, where millions of people work in factories, offices, and farms to produce everyday products like cars, electronics, clothing, and food. And because Mexico is close to the United States and Canada, these products can be transported quickly, which helps businesses reduce costs and increase efficiency.
Because of this geographic advantage, Mexico developed a strong manufacturing-based economy, meaning that many goods are produced inside the country and then exported abroad, and this process is often described using the passive voice in economics, such as cars are assembled, products are exported, and goods are transported, which helps explain production without focusing on individual workers.
For example, when we say cars are manufactured in Mexico, we are talking about a system where factories, machines, supply chains, and skilled workers all work together to create products that people use every day, even if those people live thousands of kilometers away. And this shows how Mexico's economy is closely linked to global demand.
Another important foundation of Mexico's economy is its deep relationship with North American markets, especially the United States, because a large percentage of Mexican exports are sent north, and as a result, economic growth in Mexico is often influenced by consumer demand, industrial trends, and trade policies in the wider North American region.
In simple terms, when people in the United States buy more cars, electronics, or household products, more goods are ordered from Mexican factories, which means more jobs are created and more income is generated. And this clear cause and effect relationship helps English learners understand how international trade directly affects everyday economic life.
Mexico's export-based model also encouraged the development of industrial vocabulary such as manufacturing, assembly, supply chain, exports, and logistics. And these words are essential for understanding modern economies because they describe how raw materials are transformed into finished products and delivered efficiently to global markets.
As you listen to this section, try to focus on the supporting details rather than only the main idea, because details like location, trade routes, and production systems help explain why Mexico's economy works the way it does. And noticing how these ideas are explained in clear English will strengthen both your listening skills and your ability to discuss economic topics confidently.
When economists compare the economic size of countries like Brazil and Mexico, the first concept they usually introduce is GDP, or gross domestic product. And although this term sounds technical and complex, it simply refers to the total value of all goods and services produced inside a country during 1 year, which means it helps us measure how much economic activity is happening within national borders over a specific period of time.
To explain this in very simple language, you can imagine GDP as a very large calculator that adds together everything a country produces, including food, cars, buildings, education services, healthcare services, and even digital products. So when people say a country has a large GDP, they are really saying that a lot of economic work and exchange happens there every year.
Using total GDP, Brazil is often described as the largest economy in Latin America because the combined value of everything produced by its farms, factories, offices, and service industries is higher than that of other countries in the region, and this is mainly caused by its large population, vast land area, and wide range of economic activities.
So, if we compare total GDP numbers, Brazil usually appears bigger. But this does not automatically mean that life is better for every person living there, which is why economists often look at another measurement called GDP per person, also known as GDP per capita, to understand economic conditions more clearly.
GDP per person is calculated by dividing the total GDP of a country by its population, and this step-by-step process helps economists estimate how much economic value is available for each individual on average, which makes it easier to compare countries with very different population sizes.
In everyday terms, GDP per person is like taking a large cake, which represents the economy, and cutting it into equal slices for every citizen, because even if one cake is bigger than another, the size of each slice depends on how many people are sharing it.
When we use this comparison, the difference between Brazil and Mexico becomes more interesting, because although Brazil has a larger total GDP, Mexico's GDP per person can sometimes appear similar or even higher in certain years, showing that economic size alone does not fully explain economic strength or living standards.
This is an important lesson for English learners, because it teaches us how to compare numbers carefully, using phrases like larger than, smaller than, on average, and per person, instead of making quick conclusions based only on big figures.
Another reason size alone does not show full economic strength is that GDP does not measure how evenly money is distributed, how stable an economy is, or how strong public services are, and because of this limitation, economists always remind us that GDP is a useful tool, but not a complete picture.
So when you hear someone say, country A is stronger because it has a bigger GDP, it is helpful to ask follow-up questions like, how many people live there? How is the money shared? And how stable is the economy over time? Because these questions help you think more deeply.
When comparing Brazil and Mexico, economists also consider how each country earns its GDP, because an economy that depends on many sectors, such as agriculture, manufacturing, and services, may be more resilient than one that depends heavily on only one source of income.
This means that even if two countries have similar GDP numbers, the structure behind those numbers can be very different, which affects how well each economy can handle global changes, market shifts, or economic challenges.
For example, if global demand changes or international trade slows down, countries with diversified economies may adapt more easily, while countries with narrow economic bases may feel stronger pressure. And this cause and effect relationship is essential for understanding economic comparisons.
As listeners, you can practice your English by noticing how numbers are explained rather than memorized, because understanding expressions like approximately, slightly higher, significantly lower, and in comparison to will help you follow economic discussions with more confidence.
Another useful point to remember is that GDP comparisons are often influenced by exchange rates and global prices, which means that economic size can look different depending on how and when the numbers are measured. And this is why economists avoid making simple judgments based on one single year.
In learner-friendly terms, this tells us that economies are not static because they change over time, grow at different speeds, and respond differently to global events. So comparisons should always be made carefully and thoughtfully.
At this stage, it is helpful to review key vocabulary such as GDP, GDP per person, economic size, average, comparison, and distribution, because these words appear frequently in news articles, reports, and international discussions.
Before we move on, take a moment to reflect on what you have learned so far and ask yourself whether you now understand the difference between total economic size and individual economic experience, because this reflection helps turn listening into real learning.
By understanding how GDP works and why it has limits, we can make fairer and more balanced comparisons between Brazil and Mexico, which prepares us for the next part of our discussion, where we will look beyond numbers and explore trade, influence, and long-term economic connections.
And remember, the goal here is not to decide a winner, but to learn how economists think, compare, and explain complex ideas in clear English, because this skill is just as valuable as learning the facts themselves.
When we talk about global trade in relation to Brazil, we are talking about how goods are produced, sold, shipped, and exchanged with many different countries around the world, because Brazil trades agricultural products, raw materials, and industrial goods with partners in Asia, Europe, North America, and other parts of Latin America, and this wide network of trade relationships exists mainly because Brazil's large economy allows it to supply food, energy, and materials that are needed by many international markets.
To connect this idea to daily life, you can imagine how everyday products like coffee, sugar, meat, or even airplane parts may start their journey in Brazil, then are packed, transported, exported, and finally used by people in distant countries, which helps learners understand that trade is not an abstract concept, but a long process that links farmers, factory workers, drivers, port workers, and consumers through a clear sequence of economic actions.
Mexico's role in global trade looks different because its economy is strongly export-driven, meaning that many goods are manufactured, assembled, and shipped abroad, especially to North American markets, and verbs like produce, assemble, export, deliver, and sell are commonly used to describe this process, which shows how Mexico's growth is closely connected to external demand rather than only domestic consumption.
For example, when we say cars are assembled in Mexico and exported to the United States, we are describing a clear economic process where parts are imported, products are manufactured, quality is checked, goods are transported, and payments are received. And this simple sequence helps English learners follow how trade works step by step without feeling overwhelmed by technical details.
Trade directly affects jobs and economic growth because when exports increase, factories expand, workers are hired, services grow, and incomes rise. But when global demand slows, production is reduced, working hours are cut, and growth becomes weaker, which clearly shows a cause and effect relationship that helps explain why countries like Brazil and Mexico pay close attention to international markets and trade agreements.
In everyday terms, trade influences how many people are employed, how much money families earn, and how stable communities feel. Because when exports grow, new opportunities are created, but when exports fall, uncertainty increases. And understanding this connection helps listeners see why trade news often appears in headlines and why governments try to protect and expand their global economic connections.
For language learners, this section is useful because it includes common verb-noun collocations such as increase exports, create jobs, expand markets, reduce costs, and support growth, and recognizing these combinations will help you understand economic news more easily and speak more naturally when explaining how global trade systems function.
As you listen, try to follow the sequence of actions rather than memorizing numbers, because listening for order, what happens first, what happens next, and what happens as a result, will strengthen your comprehension skills and help you understand complex global processes using clear and practical English.
When we examine Brazil's industrial foundation, we see that its energy and industrial sectors developed mainly because the country has abundant natural resources and a large domestic market, which led to the growth of industries such as oil and gas production, electricity generation, steel manufacturing, and heavy industry. And as a result, Brazil built an industrial system that focuses not only on exports, but also on supplying energy and materials to support its own long-term economic needs.
In simpler terms, Brazil's industry is often described as resource-based and internally supportive, because energy is produced, materials are processed, and industrial goods are supplied within the country itself, which helps listeners understand adjectives like large-scale, resource-rich, and self-supporting when describing how an economic system is designed to meet both domestic demand and regional influence.
Mexico's industrial structure looks quite different because its manufacturing and assembly industries developed mainly due to its close connection with North American markets, which encouraged factories to specialize in assembling cars, electronics, medical devices, and household goods that are designed elsewhere but efficiently produced in Mexico, creating an industrial system that is outward-looking and strongly linked to international supply chains.
So, while Brazil's industry is often described as broad and resource-driven, Mexico's manufacturing system is usually called export-oriented and highly integrated. And using these contrasting adjectives helps English learners clearly express how two countries can both be industrialized while following very different economic paths.
Another important difference appears when we talk about innovation, because in Brazil, innovation is often connected to improving energy efficiency, agricultural technology, and industrial processes that support large-scale production, while in Mexico, innovation is more frequently related to improving manufacturing speed, quality control, logistics, and technological coordination within global production networks.
This means that innovation does not always look the same in every country, because one system may focus on developing new methods to manage resources more efficiently, while another system concentrates on refining production techniques, automation, and digital coordination. And recognizing this difference helps learners understand adjectives such as efficient, adaptive, specialized, and technology-driven.
From a neutral comparison point of view, both Brazil and Mexico rely on industrial activity to support employment and growth, but the structure of their systems explains why Brazil's industry is often linked to national development goals, while Mexico's manufacturing sector is closely connected to global companies and foreign demand.
To reinforce this contrast, we can say that Brazil's system is more internally focused and diversified, whereas Mexico's system is more externally connected and production-centered. And these descriptive adjectives allow English learners to compare complex systems clearly without oversimplifying them.
Technology also plays a supporting role in both countries because digital tools, automation, and data systems are increasingly used to manage factories, improve productivity, and reduce costs. But the way technology is applied depends on the structure of each economy and the goals of its industrial sectors.
In learner-friendly language, this tells us that technology is not separate from industry, but instead works inside the system to make processes faster, safer, and more reliable, which helps listeners practice describing systems using phrases like connected to, supported by, and designed to improve.
Understanding these differences between Brazil and Mexico helps us see that industrial strength does not come from one single model, because economic success can be built through energy production, manufacturing efficiency, or innovation in different forms, depending on geography, resources, and trade relationships.
As you listen, try to notice how comparison words such as while, whereas, both, and however are used, because mastering these structures will help you describe industries, economies, and systems in clear and confident English, which is one of the main learning goals of this podcast.
When we examine the role of the workforce in Brazil and Mexico, it is essential to understand that a country's labor force is made up of all the people who are able and willing to work, and the skills, training, and education of these workers directly influence economic growth because highly skilled workers can increase productivity, manage technology efficiently, and contribute to industrial, agricultural, and service sectors, which in turn affects how successfully a country competes in both domestic and international markets.
In simpler terms, you can think of the workforce as all the people who contribute to making products, providing services, and supporting industries. And when workers are well educated and trained, they can perform better, solve problems more quickly, and help the economy grow, which makes abstract ideas like labor force, skills, and productivity easier to understand and remember for English learners.
Education plays a central role in shaping the workforce, because the quality and accessibility of schools, vocational training centers, and universities determine how prepared people are to enter jobs that require technical knowledge, critical thinking, and practical skills. And when educational systems are strong, workers can innovate, manage production, and respond to global competition more effectively, which ultimately increases national productivity and long-term economic stability.
For example, when a student learns engineering, computer programming, or agricultural science in Mexico or Brazil, they can later work in factories, offices, or farms and apply what they learn to make processes faster, safer, and more efficient, which shows that education directly connects to everyday economic activity. And using concrete examples helps English learners understand abstract ideas like workforce preparation and human capital.
Despite their strengths, both Brazil and Mexico face challenges in education and workforce development because there are inequalities in access to high-quality education, regional disparities, and differences between urban and rural areas, which sometimes prevent workers from acquiring the advanced skills needed for modern industries, and this gap affects productivity, innovation, and the ability of companies to compete globally.
To put this more clearly, imagine a factory where some workers know how to operate machines very well, while others have less training. The overall output is affected because the factory cannot run at full capacity, and this simple analogy helps learners understand abstract economic ideas like skills gaps, labor quality, and economic efficiency in a practical way.
Productivity, which is one of the most important concepts in this discussion, refers to how efficiently workers, machines, and resources are used to produce goods and services. And when productivity is high, more value is created with the same number of workers, which supports higher incomes, better services, and stronger economic growth over time, making it a central measurement for comparing Brazil and Mexico's economic performance.
In learner-friendly language, productivity can be imagined as how much work gets done in a certain period. Because if one worker can produce 10 products in an hour, while another can produce only 5, the first worker is more productive. And this example helps English learners understand abstract nouns and the idea that efficiency matters for both individuals and nations.
A key point is that productivity is influenced not only by individual skills, but also by investment in technology, management practices, infrastructure, and continuous education. Because workers can only perform efficiently if they have the tools, knowledge, and organizational support needed to do their jobs properly, which highlights the interconnected nature of workforce development, education, and economic growth.
For instance, a Brazilian factory with modern machines and trained engineers will produce more goods faster and with better quality than a factory without such investments, which clearly shows cause and effect and helps learners connect abstract ideas like productivity, efficiency, and human capital to real-life examples that are easier to visualize and discuss in English.
Moreover, both countries are increasingly focused on integrating technology and innovation into workforce training programs, because teaching digital skills, data management, and advanced manufacturing techniques allows workers to adapt to global market demands, improve efficiency, and compete in international supply chains, which demonstrates how education and innovation together enhance productivity.
This means that workers are not only producing goods or providing services, but also learning to improve processes, solve complex problems, and use new tools, which strengthens abstract concepts like capacity, competence, and economic contribution, and gives English learners useful vocabulary to describe modern labor forces and educational strategies.
Finally, understanding the connections between workforce skills, education quality, and productivity is essential for analyzing economic potential, because countries that invest in human capital and ensure equitable access to training can create stronger, more resilient economies, which affects trade, industry, and global competitiveness in a way that is measurable, long-term, and critical for Latin America's overall development.
So, dear listeners, when we summarize this section, we can say that workforce quality, education, and productivity are interdependent, because education prepares skilled workers improve productivity, and higher productivity strengthens the economy, which allows governments and companies to invest in further education and technology, creating a continuous cycle of growth that is both practical to understand and highly relevant for English learners practicing abstract nouns, process explanations, and cause and effect reasoning.
When we consider the economic challenges faced by Brazil and Mexico, it is important to remember that challenges do not mean failure or negativity, but instead they are natural aspects of any economy, because countries of this size and complexity must manage issues such as inflation, regional inequalities, and maintaining balanced growth, which requires careful planning, strategic investment, and policies that encourage both short-term performance and long-term economic stability.
In simpler terms, think of an economy like a large machine with many moving parts, where prices, income distribution, and production levels need to be balanced carefully. And if one part moves too fast or too slowly, adjustments are needed to ensure the whole system continues to function efficiently, which makes abstract concepts like stability, growth balance, and inflation management easier to visualize and understand for English learners.
One common challenge is inflation, which refers to the rate at which prices of goods and services rise over time, and managing inflation requires careful economic policies, because high inflation can make everyday products like food, transportation, and housing more expensive, while very low inflation may slow economic growth. So maintaining a moderate level is considered essential for stability and overall economic confidence.
To put this in simple language, imagine that the cost of bread or fuel suddenly rises too quickly. People may struggle to afford basic items, but if prices rise too slowly or not at all, businesses may not earn enough to expand. So countries like Brazil and Mexico try to find a balance that allows citizens to maintain purchasing power while supporting economic growth, which helps learners connect abstract economic terms to daily life.
Another important issue is inequality, which refers to differences in income, access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities across different regions or social groups. And addressing these differences is not about criticism, but about understanding how uneven development can affect productivity, workforce potential, and social stability, which encourages economists and policymakers to design targeted interventions for inclusive growth.
In easier terms, inequality means that some people or regions may have more resources, better schools, or more jobs than others. And by recognizing these differences, countries can plan programs that provide support where it is needed, improving overall efficiency and fairness. And using this neutral language helps English learners practice describing sensitive economic topics politely and clearly.
Maintaining a balance between growth and stability is also a central challenge, because while rapid economic growth can create jobs, raise incomes, and encourage investment, it may also create risks such as overheating, resource depletion, or unsustainable debt. And understanding this relationship requires careful analysis of long-term consequences and the design of policies that encourage steady, sustainable development rather than short-term gains alone.
For example, if a country grows very quickly but does not manage resources or public finances carefully, future generations may face difficulties, whereas a country that grows steadily and invests in education, technology, and infrastructure can build resilience and stability, which shows English learners how abstract concepts like sustainability, resilience, and long-term planning are connected to real-world outcomes.
It is also useful to understand that economic stability is measured not only by growth rates or inflation, but also by confidence in institutions, trust in government, and consistency in financial and trade policies. Because when citizens, businesses, and investors believe that an economy is reliable, they are more likely to save, invest, and participate actively in productive activities, which supports continuous development.
In practical terms, stability allows people to plan their lives, businesses to hire workers, and governments to implement long-term projects without constant fear of sudden changes. And this framing helps learners see that challenges are not failures, but opportunities for thoughtful planning, critical thinking, and learning how economies operate in a careful and balanced way.
Finally, recognizing economic challenges and stability as neutral learning points encourages English learners to use academic language, such as economic pressures, growth management, policy adjustments, and financial resilience, because these terms allow discussion of complex ideas politely, clearly, and without exaggeration, which is especially important when analyzing national economies for educational purposes.
So, in summary, the key takeaway from this section is that managing inflation, reducing inequality, and maintaining balanced growth are natural components of economic life, and by thinking of them as structured learning points rather than negative issues, listeners can develop a deeper understanding of how Brazil and Mexico navigate these challenges while maintaining long-term stability. And this approach also strengthens vocabulary, abstract reasoning, and polite academic discussion skills in English.
When we discuss Brazil and Mexico in terms of regional influence, it is important to understand that leadership in Latin America is not measured solely by GDP numbers or population size, but also by the ability to shape trade agreements, participate in multinational organizations, influence diplomatic decisions, and support economic development in neighboring countries. Because a country that combines economic strength with political engagement can become a reference point for stability and cooperation in the region, which shows that influence is both economic and strategic.
In simpler language, we can imagine Brazil or Mexico as leading countries that help guide policies, provide support, or set examples for smaller neighbors. And by using modal verbs like can, may, and might, learners can express possibilities, predictions, and potential actions, which is very useful for talking about influence and imagining what could happen in the future.
Looking forward, Brazil may continue to exercise influence in South America by leveraging its large economy, natural resources, and role in regional organizations such as Mercosur and the Organization of American States. Because when a country actively participates in multilateral negotiations, invests in regional infrastructure, and supports trade partnerships, it strengthens not only its own position, but also the economic stability and cooperative potential of neighboring countries.
For English learners, this scenario helps practice sentences like, Brazil may expand its influence, or Mexico might lead new trade initiatives, which use modal verbs to express possibility. And imagining these situations also encourages listeners to think critically about how countries interact and how regional leadership develops over time.
Mexico, on the other hand, has the potential to strengthen its influence by continuing to develop trade relationships with North America while also engaging with other Latin American nations, because its geographic location, manufacturing expertise, and strategic economic connections allow it to act as a bridge between large economies in the north and developing markets in the south, which suggests that Mexico might play a central role in coordinating regional development projects or facilitating cross-border trade agreements in the future.
In everyday terms, you can picture Mexico helping nearby countries by sharing expertise, supporting investment projects, or offering guidance on trade policies. And sentences like, Mexico can support regional growth, or it may collaborate with other nations, provide clear examples of how modal verbs are used to discuss potential future actions, reinforcing both grammar and vocabulary.
Future possibilities for both Brazil and Mexico are closely tied to innovation, technology adoption, and workforce development, because countries that invest in education, modern infrastructure, renewable energy, and digital industries are more likely to shape the regional agenda, attract foreign investment, and influence policies on trade, climate, and sustainability, which shows that leadership is not static, but evolves with strategic planning and long-term vision.
Listeners can imagine scenarios such as Brazil becoming a leader in renewable energy or Mexico establishing technology hubs that attract international companies. And by using phrases like might become, could lead, or is likely to develop, learners practice predictive language and future tense structures in realistic, global contexts that connect English learning to real-world events.
It is also helpful to recognize that influence is multifaceted, because economic strength alone may allow a country to negotiate effectively, but cultural presence, diplomatic engagement, and environmental leadership also contribute to shaping perceptions, partnerships, and collaborative opportunities across the region, which emphasizes that future potential involves more than numbers. It includes ideas, actions, and strategic choices.
For example, Brazil could use its cultural exports, such as music, sports, and festivals, to strengthen ties with other countries, while Mexico might promote educational programs and technology collaborations to increase its soft power, which allows learners to see that influence is created through multiple channels, and sentences using may, might, or could help express these nuanced possibilities clearly in English.
By combining economic, technological, and diplomatic strategies, both countries can potentially shape Latin America's regional agenda over the next decades, because countries that maintain stability, promote innovation, and engage constructively with neighbors are more likely to attract investment, create employment opportunities, and provide leadership in areas such as trade, climate policy, and social development, which highlights the interconnected nature of influence and long-term potential.
Listeners can also imagine statements like, Mexico might expand its trade networks, or Brazil could become a regional hub for renewable energy, which not only illustrate future tense and modal verb usage, but also reinforce comprehension of abstract ideas like regional influence, strategic potential, and leadership development in a way that is clear, engaging, and practical for English learners.
Finally, understanding regional influence and future potential encourages critical thinking, because it allows learners to evaluate how countries interact, predict possible outcomes, and consider multiple factors such as economics, politics, and culture. And by framing these discussions using neutral, predictive language, English learners can build confidence in both speaking and listening while exploring complex global topics in a structured and educational way.
So, to summarize this section, Brazil and Mexico may both continue to exercise significant influence in Latin America through economic activity, technology, cultural engagement, and diplomatic efforts. And by using modal verbs like can, may, might, and could, listeners can express possibilities and predict outcomes, which strengthens English grammar, vocabulary, and the ability to discuss future scenarios in a thoughtful, professional, and learner-friendly manner.
When we consider the future of Brazil and Mexico, it is important to highlight the growing role of sustainability and the green economy, because as global awareness of environmental challenges increases, countries that invest in renewable energy, efficient resource management, and environmentally friendly technologies will not only contribute to global climate goals, but also strengthen their own economic growth, create new jobs, attract international investment, and enhance long-term competitiveness, which makes sustainability a critical factor in assessing future potential.
In simple language, you can think of sustainability as using resources in a way that does not harm the environment and allows people and economies to continue growing in the long term. And when we say green economy, we mean industries, technologies, and business practices that are focused on clean energy, low pollution, and responsible use of natural resources, which gives English learners important vocabulary like renewable energy, environmental impact, and sustainable growth.
Brazil, for example, has enormous potential in renewable energy due to its large rivers, sunny climate, and extensive forests, which allow for hydropower, solar, and biomass production, and by investing in these sectors, the country can reduce dependence on fossil fuels, provide cleaner energy to its industries, and also export technology and expertise to neighboring countries, creating both economic and environmental benefits that reinforce its regional leadership.
Listeners can imagine Brazil building solar farms, expanding hydropower plants, and managing forests carefully, which not only helps the planet, but also provides jobs and strengthens the economy, and practicing sentences like, Brazil can expand renewable energy production, or it may become a green technology. Leader helps learners use modal verbs, future tense, and predictive language effectively.
Mexico also has significant opportunities in sustainable growth because its geographic diversity, access to wind corridors, solar potential, and existing industrial base allow it to integrate green technologies into manufacturing, urban planning, and energy production, which means the country can reduce carbon emissions, improve efficiency in production processes, and develop new markets for clean technology exports, while supporting domestic development and economic resilience.
To explain this simply, Mexico could create wind farms in coastal regions, install solar panels in cities, and design factories that use less energy and produce less waste, which shows learners how abstract ideas like carbon reduction, efficiency, and green technology can be expressed in concrete examples, and it allows practicing vocabulary related to environmental economics and sustainability.
Sustainability also connects closely to workforce development, because transitioning to a green economy requires trained professionals in engineering, energy management, environmental science, and technology, and countries that invest in education, vocational training, and skill development for these sectors will be better positioned to attract foreign investment, create high-quality jobs, and maintain competitiveness in the global economy, which highlights the interplay between workforce, education, and future growth.
For learners, this means that education is not just about reading or writing. It is about preparing workers to operate and innovate in industries that are environmentally responsible, and sentences like, workers may be trained in renewable energy technology, or students can learn sustainable engineering, help practice future tense and modal verbs, while reinforcing the connection between skills and economic potential.
Another dimension to consider is international cooperation, because both Brazil and Mexico can benefit from participating in global agreements on climate change, trade incentives for green technology, and collaborative research projects, which allows them to learn from other countries, access funding for sustainable projects, and integrate environmental standards into their national development strategies, reinforcing both economic growth and ecological responsibility.
In easier terms, this means that countries may work together to share knowledge, technologies, and financial resources, and practicing sentences like, Brazil could cooperate with other nations, or Mexico may implement international sustainability standards, helps learners understand predictive language, possibility, and collaboration vocabulary, while imagining real-world global scenarios.
Sustainable practices also affect trade and investment, because global markets are increasingly demanding environmentally friendly products, clean supply chains, and corporate social responsibility, and countries that adopt green technologies and sustainable production processes are more likely to attract investors, secure trade agreements, and maintain a positive international reputation, which demonstrates how long-term planning and sustainability is linked directly to economic success and competitiveness.
For learners, think of it this way. If a factory uses clean energy and produces eco-friendly products, more countries may want to buy from it, and investors may see it as a safe choice, which shows how vocabulary like eco-friendly, responsible production, and investment potential can be used in real sentences, reinforcing language and conceptual understanding at the same time.
Finally, understanding sustainability and the green economy in Brazil and Mexico allows us to see that the future of economic growth is not just about numbers, but also about long-term planning, ethical responsibility, technological advancement, and environmental stewardship, because countries that balance economic, social, and ecological objectives are more likely to achieve resilient, stable, and inclusive development that benefits citizens, businesses, and the international community alike.
So, dear listeners, the key takeaway is that sustainable development, green technology, and environmentally responsible policies are central to the future potential of both Brazil and Mexico, and practicing phrases like Brazil can lead in renewable energy or Mexico might develop green industries allows you to improve your modal verbs, future tense, and ability to discuss abstract, real-world concepts in English clearly, confidently, and thoughtfully.
By combining everything we discussed, from GDP, trade, and industry to workforce, productivity, regional influence, and now sustainability, you can see how modern economies function as interconnected systems. And reflecting on these ideas not only improves your English, but also develops critical thinking, global awareness, and the ability to discuss future possibilities in a professional and educational way.
We encourage all learners to continue listening, taking notes, practicing new vocabulary, and forming sentences using modal verbs and future tense to describe real-world economic trends, because each step of practice strengthens your comprehension, speaking, and analytical skills, and prepares you to engage meaningfully in discussions about global issues while improving your English in a structured, learner-friendly format.
In conclusion, sustainability is not a separate topic, but a vital component of economic growth, regional influence, and future potential. And by imagining how Brazil and Mexico can develop green industries, reduce environmental impact, and create sustainable jobs, learners can apply English vocabulary, grammar structures, and predictive language in a way that is both practical and academically enriching, supporting long-term learning goals.
So, as you reflect on this final section, remember that understanding economic systems, workforce development, regional leadership, and sustainability together allows you to see the bigger picture, and practicing your English by discussing these topics enhances both your language skills and your global perspective, making you more confident, knowledgeable, and prepared to participate in conversations about economics, sustainability, and international development.
As we come to the final part of today's discussion, it is important to pause and reflect on the main ideas we have explored, because understanding Brazil and Mexico's economies, their trade networks, workforce development, industrial sectors, regional influence, and future potential is not just about memorizing facts, but also about seeing how these concepts connect to each other and how they can be used to develop both knowledge of the world and proficiency in English, which emphasizes the long-term value of listening and critical thinking.
To make this reflection practical for learners, let us review some of the key vocabulary from today's episode, including terms such as GDP, exports, manufacturing, productivity, regional influence, stability, innovation, and future potential. And by repeating these words, using them in sentences, and connecting them to real-world examples, learners can strengthen comprehension and retain language that will be useful for reading, speaking, and understanding economic discussions.
It is also helpful to remember the relationships we discussed, because, for example, workforce skills directly influence productivity, which in turn affects economic growth, trade, and regional influence. And by seeing these cause and effect connections, learners can understand not only how economies function, but also how to use linking phrases, logical connectors, and cohesive structures in English to describe complex systems clearly and effectively.
To reinforce this understanding, consider reflecting on questions such as, how might Brazil or Mexico use innovation to increase regional influence? What factors contribute to a country's long-term economic stability? How can workforce development improve productivity and trade? These reflection questions encourage learners to think critically, practice forming responses in English, and engage with global topics using structured, thoughtful language.
Another important point for learners is to recognize patterns of comparison and contrast, because we examined how Brazil's resource-driven industry differs from Mexico's export-oriented manufacturing, how each country manages workforce and education differently, and how their approaches to innovation and trade may shape future influence. And by articulating these observations in English, learners can strengthen vocabulary, sentence variety, and the ability to describe similarities and differences accurately.
For example, a learner might say, Brazil focuses on resource-based industries, whereas Mexico is export-oriented, which uses clear comparison language and concise vocabulary. Or, Mexico could expand its influence through technology and trade, which demonstrates predictive language and modal verbs. And practicing sentences like these helps learners apply grammar, vocabulary, and reasoning simultaneously.
It is equally important to see that learning English through global topics allows you to combine language practice with knowledge of current events, economics, and international relations. Because when learners engage with meaningful subjects, they not only improve listening, comprehension, and vocabulary skills, but also develop the ability to discuss abstract ideas, analyze information critically, and participate in global conversations, which adds real value to language study beyond textbooks.
To encourage further practice, you might consider keeping a learning journal where you write short paragraphs summarizing each topic we cover, using new vocabulary such as innovation, productivity, stability, and regional influence, and forming reflective questions like, how might trade agreements affect Mexico's economy? Or, what could Brazil do to increase its influence in Latin America? Which reinforces both language structure and conceptual understanding.
Finally, dear listeners, it is essential to remember that language learning and knowledge acquisition are long-term processes, and by consistently listening to podcasts, reading articles, discussing global topics, and reflecting on the ideas presented, you are gradually building fluency, expanding vocabulary, strengthening comprehension, and developing confidence in expressing complex thoughts in English, which shows the importance of patience, curiosity, and structured practice over time.
So, to summarize, Today we explored key aspects of Brazil and Mexico's economies, including trade, industry, workforce, productivity, regional influence, and future potential. While learning how to describe these concepts clearly in English using vocabulary, modal verbs, comparisons, and reflective thinking. And I encourage you to continue asking questions, forming sentences, and imagining possibilities, because every step you take helps you become a more confident and globally aware English learner.
As we conclude, remember to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and share in the comments where you are listening from, what new words or ideas you learned today, and your opinions on Brazil and Mexico's future economic influence, because your engagement not only supports the channel, but also gives you the opportunity to practice expressing your ideas in English, applying the vocabulary, grammar, and reflective strategies we discussed, and reinforcing learning in a meaningful way.
Thank you, dear listeners, for being part of this educational journey. And as you continue to explore global topics, remember that every time you listen, reflect, and speak in English, you are improving not only your language skills, but also your understanding of the world, which empowers you to participate in discussions, read international news, and communicate confidently about complex economic and social ideas, creating a strong foundation for lifelong learning and global awareness.
Okay. Let's unpack this. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the complicated and, well, make it crystal clear. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into one of the most foundational and just endlessly fascinating economic debates in the Global South, Brazil versus Mexico. We're tackling the central question of who truly leads Latin America's massive, diverse, and let's be honest, often volatile economy. You, our listener, you see these two countries referenced constantly in global reports. They're the regional heavyweights, for sure. But understanding the structural differences that make this comparison so essential and what that tells us about the future of the continent, well, that's our mission today.
That really is the critical lens we need. And to properly set the stage, we have to remember that Latin America is huge. It's diverse. It's complex. It is not a monolith.
Not at all.
But Brazil and Mexico, they stand out. They are the two largest economies, and they wield this immense gravity and influence over regional trade, industry, and, the overall growth trajectories. So when we analyze who leads, we aren't suggesting other nations don't matter. We're just recognizing that the economic health and the structural choices of these two giants, they disproportionately shape the opportunities and the challenges for all of their neighbors. They really do set the pace.
So we need to clarify our terms right away. When we say economic leadership, it's not just a contest for the biggest GDP number.
Yeah.
What precisely are we measuring when we talk about continental leadership?
It's a bit of an abstract idea for sure, but we can quantify it. I think we can break it down into four main pillars. First, you have the foundational factor, the sheer size of the economy. And yes, that's typically measured by GDP.
Okay, that's number one.
Second, and this is crucial, the volume and the complexity of a country's trade relationships with the rest of the world. Third is population size, that raw pool of skilled workers, and also the mass of consumers you need for a strong internal market. And fourth, and this is one that's often overlooked, is the political and economic influence a country exerts in regional and global markets. I mean, its ability to guide stability and diplomatic direction.
And while our audience definitely knows what GDP gross domestic product is, we should probably establish it as the starting line. It's the measure of the total value of all goods and services produced in 1 year. It's the big combined score, right? The coffee, the cars, the banking services, the tourism, all of it.
GDP is indispensable. It's our foundational measure, but as we've talked about in other deep dives, we have to caution immediately against relying only on that one figure. If we only look at total GDP, we miss all the nuance.
All the important stuff.
Exactly. That's why we also have to scrutinize the structure of their trade. Who are they trading with? What are they trading? We have to look at demographics, productivity levels, international connections, these things that sound technical, like the efficiency of supply chains or the stability of local prices. They're what translate directly into jobs, into living standards, and investment opportunities for everyone listening.
I often think of the economy as this massive, intricate living system. It's constantly in flux. And our sources suggest that to understand this system, you have to grasp that When it's strong and healthy, businesses find capital to grow.
Right.
Jobs are created rapidly, and governments have the tax revenue to invest in critical long-term goods, like high-speed rail or advanced education.
And conversely, when that system is constrained, let's say by high debt or unpredictable politics or just structural inefficiencies, daily life gets measurably harder for citizens. Inflation spikes, reliable work is scarce, and the cost of just maintaining infrastructure can overwhelm the government. The ability to manage the system, that's what defines economic competence. And understanding how Brazil and Mexico are managing their very distinct systems is really the core of our analysis today.
So to frame this whole thing, we've got two giants who built their prosperity using fundamentally different blueprints, which is exactly why the comparison is so rich. On one hand, we have Brazil, characterized by its staggering scale, its vast internal market, and a deep reliance on rich natural resources. And then we have Mexico, defined by its strong manufacturing sectors and an incredibly tight, unique trade connection to the North American behemoths. This foundational structural tension resource giant versus North American bridge, that's what we'll be exploring in detail. Okay, let's start by immersing ourselves in the Brazilian model. When we talk about Brazil, we have to start with sheer scale. I mean, it is just enormous. It's the fifth largest country globally, the largest in South America by land area, and it has the largest population in all of Latin America.
And that immense size is a critical, self-defining economic factor. That population, you're talking over 215 million people. That creates a massive, powerful internal market.
A huge one.
Right. This means Brazilian businesses can often grow to a significant scale just by focusing on domestic consumption selling products and services exclusively inside the country. That's in addition to, but not completely reliant upon, exports. And that is a foundational difference from smaller nations.
So if the global market hits a downturn, if trade wars break out, or if commodity prices suddenly drop, Brazil has a kind of built-in economic stabilizer. Like a shock absorber, right? It can still rely on millions of its own workers and consumers just generating economic activity internally.
Precisely. That large population provides crucial resilience. It's a kind of insulation. It allows companies to produce locally, sell locally, and expand without depending entirely on the volatility of foreign markets. This diversification of demand gives the Brazilian economy a structural balance that's inherently resilient against external shocks, although it also creates its own specific set of challenges, which I'm sure we'll get into.
But that scale is also underpinned by just phenomenal resource wealth. Brazil isn't just large, it's immensely wealthy in natural assets.
That's the second and equally crucial pillar. Brazil is rich in fertile land. It possesses something like 12% of the world's freshwater, vast forests. It has significant mineral deposits, iron ore, gold, bauxite, and substantial energy sources, including deep water oil and gas. This natural wealth really dictates a specific industrial path. It enables Brazil to self-produce the vast majority of what it needs: food, raw materials, energy. All of this reduces their dependence on imports and strengthens the self-sufficiency strategy.
And the most globally recognized example of that strategy is, without a doubt, agriculture. The statistics on Brazilian agriculture are just staggering.
Oh, absolutely. Brazil's climate, coupled with massive investments in agricultural technology driven by entities like the state-run research corporation Embrapa, has allowed it to become a tropical agricultural superpower. I mean, they are world leaders in the production and export of soybeans, coffee, sugarcane, corn, and beef. This resource strength allows Brazil not only to feed its own massive population, but to dominate global commodity markets. And that brings an enormous foreign currency income and reinforces its global economic position.
But the structural strategy went beyond just exporting raw materials. Our sources detail this deliberate historical push to build out a comprehensive industrial sector to process those resources domestically.
And that decision was key. It was key to achieving higher economic value and strategic self-sufficiency. Instead of just shipping out raw iron ore, they built steel mills. Instead of just exporting raw sugar, they developed large-scale ethanol production and food processing. This fostered a highly diversified industrial base that produces very sophisticated goods. We're talking cars, major commercial aircraft, think Embraer machinery, and capital goods.
And this industrial growth then naturally paved the way for the services sector.
It's a natural progression. As national incomes rose, so did consumer demand for more complex services. And this led to the expansion of banking, education, advanced healthcare, tourism, and a really rapidly growing technology sector. This progression from a strong agricultural base, feeding into a comprehensive industry, and then culminating in sophisticated services, that is the textbook definition of a diversified economy. This balance means that if global iron ore prices crash, the service sector or agricultural exports can potentially absorb that shock. That's a feature that's critical for maintaining stability.
Now let's talk about the regional impact of all this. How does this combination of size, diversity, and resources translate into political and economic leverage over its neighbors?
Brazil's size makes it an anchor, especially for its South American neighbors. Smaller economies are profoundly influenced by Brazil's trade decisions and its stability. The success or failure of Brazil's big infrastructure projects, like these massive regional energy and transportation initiatives, they often determine the growth rates of the border nations.
And this leverage is often exercised through specific mechanisms, like trade blocs. We mentioned Mercosur earlier, which is one of the most prominent ones.
Correct. Mercosur, the Southern Common Market, is a major trade bloc. It encompasses Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And Brazil, by far the largest economy in the bloc, uses this platform to coordinate tariffs, trade rules, and diplomatic strategy across South America. This provides a united front in trade negotiations with other global powers. Its economic weight just ensures it's seen as a key voice for the region in forums like the G20, giving it significant visibility and diplomatic influence that smaller economies simply can't achieve.
So we've established Brazil as the massive, diversified, sort of inward-looking resource giant. Now, let's turn our attention to Mexico. The core narrative here doesn't start with internal scale or resources, but with one word: location.
Geography is destiny for Mexico. It really is. As a large, active, and youthful population, yes, but its unique location, directly connecting Latin America to the United States and Canada, that is the overwhelmingly dominant factor in its economic architecture. This is why Mexico's economy developed with an outward-looking, intensely production-focused connection to international markets. It relies far less on domestic demand than Brazil does.
So the term bridge between two major economic worlds isn't just poetic, it's a functional description of its national strategy.
It's entirely functional. The Mexican economy is strategically geared toward maximizing production efficiency, leveraging lower labor costs, and maintaining exceptionally strong trade linkages with the North. The key agreement facilitating all of this, of course, is the USMCA, the successor to NAFTA. This proximity allows complex finished products, cars, electronics, medical devices, to be transported across the border incredibly quickly, often within a single day. This minimizes logistical friction, it reduces supply chain costs, and it ensures hyper-efficiency compared to competitors located on other continents.
And this geographic advantage has really cemented a distinct economic identity for them: manufacturing-based and export-oriented.
Absolutely. Mexico developed a vast and sophisticated manufacturing sector. And crucially, the goods produced inside the country are primarily intended for export. We're talking about systematic, highly optimized production that involves complex logistics. Components arrive, they're assembled or manufactured into finished goods, and they are immediately transported out. This demands constant investment in factories, robust supply chains, advanced machinery, and a highly skilled technical workforce, all operating in this coordinated system geared toward meeting the rigorous demands of North American consumer demand.
Which brings us to this profound, deep relationship with North America, which acts as the undeniable anchor and, well, sometimes the vulnerability of the Mexican economy.
This is the single most important metric to grasp. Well over 80% of Mexican exports head north to the United States and Canada. This means that Mexican economic growth, employment rates, and industrial investment are extremely sensitive to consumer demand and trade policy decisions made in Washington or Detroit.
This gives us that clear and immediate connection for the listener. The economic link isn't theoretical. It's a direct flow of cause and effect.
It's remarkably direct. When U.S. consumers are feeling financially secure and they purchase more big-ticket items, let's say a new Ford truck or an advanced medical device, more orders are placed immediately with Mexican factories. This translates almost instantly into job creation, wage increases, and income generation within Mexico. Conversely, if U.S. demand contracts or trade policies shift unfavorably, the shockwave hits Mexican production lines almost immediately.
Now, I have to introduce some critical friction here, which is a key part of the contrast. If Mexico is so heavily reliant on assembly for North America, isn't that inherently a lower value economic activity? I mean, does being the factory floor trap them into a lower wage, less innovative role compared to Brazil's attempt to build out its own plane manufacturer?
That is the perennial and frankly legitimate critique of the maquiladora, or assembly plant, model. And while assembly can be lower value than full design and intellectual property development, Mexico has successfully advanced up the complexity curve. We aren't just talking about basic textiles anymore. Mexico is a global powerhouse in sophisticated sectors like automotive manufacturing, aerospace components, and advanced medical device production, all of which require deep technical skill and stringent quality control.
So the value isn't just in the act of assembly, but in the efficiency and the complexity of the supply chain itself.
Exactly. The value lies in the speed, the quality, and the reliability of that integrated production network. To compete in this global sphere, Mexico's industrial vocabulary has to include terms like lean manufacturing, just-in-time delivery, supply chain resilience, and logistics efficiency. These concepts describe the transformation of raw materials, often sourced internationally, into finished products delivered to global markets faster and more reliably than almost anywhere else. And that really distinguishes it from Brazil's more domestically oriented, resource-based production.
Okay, so we've established the two foundational models. Brazil, the vast diversified resource giant, and Mexico, the integrated, hyper-efficient export bridge. Now, let's try to quantify the comparison, starting with that big number, total GDP.
Total GDP is our starting point for measuring scale, right? And given Brazil's much larger population and wider range of activities, you have massive agriculture, heavy industry, plus services. It historically boasts a larger total GDP than Mexico. It often takes the title of the largest economy in Latin America. It simply has more people generating more combined economic value across more sectors.
But as you cautioned earlier, that total size is deeply misleading when we're discussing real-world prosperity. I mean, Brazil has 215 million people and Mexico has 130 million. Dividing that GDP by the population is absolutely necessary to understand the economic reality on the ground.
And this brings us to the crucial measure, GDP per person, or per capita. This figure estimates the average economic value available to each individual, and that gives us a far better sense of living standards and structural health. This is where the simple comparison gets very complex.
Let's revisit the cake analogy, but then let's immediately complicate it for our audience.
The analogy holds up well. Brazil's total GDP is the bigger cake, but it's sliced into many more pieces. The size of the slice, the GDP per person, depends entirely on how many people are sharing it. And in recent years, due to factors like population growth rates and currency stability, Mexico's GDP per person, when you measure it nominally, has often been similar to, or sometimes even slightly higher than, Brazil's.
Okay, and this is where we have to introduce that technical nuance. Economists don't just use nominal GDP. They often use GDP based on purchasing power parity, or PPP.
Yeah.
Why does that metric matter, and how does it shift the Brazil-Mexico dynamic?
That's vital for a deep dive like this. Nominal GDP uses current exchange rates, which can fluctuate wildly because of commodity prices or political events. PPP, however, adjusts the GDP figures to reflect the actual buying power of the currency within the country. It asks, what can $1 buy in São Paulo versus what it can buy in Monterrey? End quote. When you use PPP, which often better reflects real living standards and structural capacity, the gap between Brazil and Mexico often narrows. It shows that even if Brazil's total nominal size is greater, the average economic clout per person is far more comparable than the headline numbers would suggest.
So numerical size doesn't determine structural strength. We need to look at how that GDP is actually earned.
Exactly. The structure dictates the long-term resilience. A diversified model like Brazil's, with income from commodities, manufacturing, and services, may offer greater protection against market shocks. But we also have to introduce the risk of the commodity supercycle. Brazil has historically boomed when resource prices are high, but those booms are often followed by devastating busts, and that creates significant instability.
And Mexico's structure, well focused, carries its own set of risks.
Oh, absolutely. Mexico's hyper-reliance on North America means its structural resilience is tied to the political stability and trade health of the U.S. If the U.S. economy slows down, or if the U.S. implements new trade tariffs or protectionist policies, Mexico takes a massive direct hit. So while Brazil struggles with commodity price swings, Mexico struggles with geopolitical and trade policy swings in Washington. Both structural models have their own inherent vulnerabilities.
And finally, we have to address the ultimate limit of GDP. It completely hides the issue of inequality, which is particularly acute in both countries.
This is essential for critical thinking. GDP tells us the size of the cake, but it tells us nothing about how it's distributed. Both Brazil and Mexico struggle with massive regional wealth disparities. In Brazil, you have the affluent industrial South São Paulo, Rio operating on a completely different economic plane than the poorer, historically less developed Northeast. And similarly, in Mexico, the export-oriented North, highly integrated with the U.S., enjoys significantly higher per capita income and better infrastructure than the agrarian, poorer southern states.
So the actionable insight for the listener isn't just to ask how big the GDP is, but to ask who lives where and how is that economic value actually shared?
Yes. We have to ask, is the growth inclusive? Does it reach the rural areas? Is the money being channeled into public services equally? Asking these questions, which GDP alone can never answer, forces us to look at social mobility, educational access, and the political will to enact policies that promote fairness, not just scale.
Let's go deeper into the industrial operations themselves. We know that the paths are divergent, but let's make that contrast visceral. Let's focus on the goals each country's industry is trying to achieve.
Well, the industrial structures are designed for very different purposes. Brazil's industry is fundamentally large-scale, resource-rich, and internally supportive. Its goal is self-sufficiency. Its historical growth model meant using its vast resources to fuel its own domestic needs, developing massive sectors like oil and gas production with Petrobras, significant steel and mining operations, and large-scale electricity generation. The focus is on processes, capacity, and supporting that massive domestic market.
So the Brazilian model is all about harnessing massive physical resources for national development.
Precisely. And Mexico's path is the counterpoint, export-oriented and highly integrated. Its industry is built around efficiency and quality control, designed to meet the specifications of foreign buyers. The factories there specialize in assembling complex, high-quality, durable goods, cars, medical instruments, advanced electronics that are often designed and financed in North America or Asia, but executed with incredible efficiency in Mexico.
This means that while both countries produce goods, the ultimate value they capture in the global supply chain is different. Mexico captures the value of highly efficient assembly and logistics, while Brazil tries to capture the value of the raw resources and the finished proprietary goods, like its commercial aircraft.
And this difference dictates their innovation agenda. Innovation in Brazil often revolves around solving problems related to large physical scale, resource management, and achieving greater national self-reliance. Think about the need to develop new strains of crops that can thrive in the varying Brazilian climates, or improving the efficiency of ethanol production, or mastering deep-sea oil drilling technology. It's about big internal challenges.
And Mexico's innovation focus.
Mexico's innovation is laser-focused on refining its role within that global supply chain. This means prioritizing investments in automation, quality control systems, logistics technology, and digital coordination to ensure immediate error-free delivery to the U.S. border. Their goal isn't necessarily to invent the next smartphone, but to manufacture it faster, cheaper, and with zero defects compared to their competition in China or Vietnam.
So technology adoption is mandatory in both countries, but it's applied strategically based on the different economic goals.
Absolutely. In Brazil, technology supports the massive scale of resource management, agricultural yields, and heavy industrial process control. It helps manage that complexity. In Mexico, technology from robotic assembly lines to sophisticated data systems is fundamentally about enhancing speed, safety, and reliability within the global delivery network. The technological investment is tied directly to maintaining competitiveness as a prime manufacturing hub right next to the world's largest consumer market.
Ultimately, neither a resource-based economy nor an export machine can run without people. The quality of the workforce is really the determining factor for long-term economic superiority.
Human capital is paramount. It's everything, the skills, the training, the education embedded in the labor force that directly determines economic potential. A highly skilled worker can manage sophisticated technology, adapt to industrial changes, and innovate new processes. All of that dramatically boosts national productivity and competitiveness in global markets.
So education is central then. It's the mechanism that translates all that potential into actual productivity.
It's the critical link. A robust educational system spanning technical schools, vocational training, and world-class universities is what prepares a nation for high-value jobs. I mean, we're talking about training agricultural engineers in Brazil to manage massive soybean operations, and training robotics and data science specialists in Mexico to run complex automotive assembly lines. This continuous preparation of the workforce is absolutely key to maintaining a competitive edge.
But both countries face this persistent problem of the skills gap, which is made worse by severe inequality in educational access.
That is the enduring challenge. Both Brazil and Mexico struggle with vast regional disparities. High-quality, technically focused education is often concentrated in the major urban centers, and that leaves rural areas, or marginalized populations, with far fewer opportunities. This creates a workforce where the training is uneven, meaning a significant portion of the population just lacks the advanced knowledge needed for the complex, technology-driven industries we were just discussing.
And this skills gap doesn't just affect social outcomes, it directly impairs the national economy.
Let's use the factory analogy again. If the management invests in a state-of-the-art automation system, but half the workforce hasn't received the high-level training to maintain, troubleshoot, and optimize that system, well, the factory operates at a fraction of its potential capacity. This lack of full utilization translates directly into lower overall productivity and inefficiency, and that affects national competitiveness and ultimately average incomes.
Okay, let's focus on productivity for a second. That concept that links skills, investment, and national wealth. How efficiently are resources being used in both countries?
Productivity measures how much value is created per worker or per unit of input. And high productivity is the engine for sustainable growth. It allows a nation to produce more goods and services with the same amount of effort, which supports higher incomes, higher profits, and enables governments to invest more.
And we should probably emphasize that productivity isn't just about the individual worker's effort.
No, it is a systemic issue. Productivity is influenced heavily by factors outside of the individual's control. Things like the quality of the nation's infrastructure, the efficiency of management practices, the level of technological investment, and the regulatory environment. For instance, in Brazil, there's this concept called custo Brazil, the Brazil cost, which is the complex and costly burden of bureaucracy, taxes, and difficult logistics. And that significantly drags down productivity, often making Brazilian goods more expensive to produce than similar goods elsewhere, despite their abundant resources.
So, a Mexican manufacturer benefits from highly optimized cross-border infrastructure, while a Brazilian manufacturer might be hobbled by internal logistical bottlenecks or excessive red tape, even if the workers in both places are working equally hard.
Exactly. The Mexican model, focused on logistics efficiency, pushes for streamlined production. Brazil has to overcome its inherent internal size, tackling high logistics costs and the cost of Brazil. Consequently, both countries are now focusing heavily on integrating digital skills and data management into their training programs to enhance efficiency, whether that's making the Brazilian agricultural supply chain more traceable or integrating robotics into the next generation of Mexican auto assembly.
As the largest economies in the region, both Brazil and Mexico face these immense, unique stability challenges that threaten their long-term growth. I think we need to move beyond just general economic threats and focus on the distinct structural risks for each country.
Absolutely. The size and complexity of both nations mean that challenges related to politics, security, and resource reliance are always present. And maintaining stability, which means predictable economic management and institutional reliability, is arguably more important than achieving these fleeting moments of rapid growth.
Let's start with the persistent balancing act they both face: managing inflation.
Inflation management is crucial for public confidence. Both countries have struggled historically with periods of hyperinflation, so price stability is a primary policy objective. The goal is always moderate inflation enough for businesses to invest and expand, but slow enough that citizens' purchasing power isn't eroded. Unchecked inflation destabilizes economies and can instantly wipe out savings and investment, which creates political upheaval.
Okay, now let's tackle the unique vulnerabilities. For Brazil, the structural challenge often seems to revolve around volatility and the risk associated with being a resource giant.
Brazil's greatest structural risk is something called the Dutch disease. This happens when a country's natural resource wealth, like oil or soybeans, causes its currency to become artificially strong. And while that sounds good for import prices, it makes all other exports, like Brazilian manufactured goods, uncompetitive internationally. This can hollow out the manufacturing sector, making the economy even more reliant on volatile commodities and amplifying that boom and bust cycle we talked about.
And Brazil also grapples with significant political volatility and corruption issues, which directly undermine investor confidence and stability.
That instability is a massive cost. Recurring, high-profile corruption scandals and political crises increase the regulatory and operational risks for both domestic and foreign investors. When investors lack confidence in the consistency of the rule of law or government policies, they hesitate. They don't want to commit long-term capital, they prefer short-term speculation. And this lack of stable, long-term investment is a significant brake on sustainable growth and job creation in Brazil.
Turning to Mexico, their challenge is less about commodity price volatility and more about geopolitical exposure and, tragically, internal security challenges.
Mexico's primary unique challenge is the pervasive influence of organized crime and the resulting security crisis. This isn't just a social issue, it's a huge economic cost. Cartel activity and high rates of violence can directly disrupt supply chains. They increase the cost of doing business, things like security fees, theft. They deter foreign direct investment. And critically, they can destabilize key infrastructure and transport routes, which undermines the very efficiency Mexico relies on.
It seems almost counterintuitive that a nation so critical to North American supply chains could function effectively under those kinds of pressures.
It really speaks to the ingenuity of their logistics sector, but the cost is real. Companies have to invest heavily in security, and the uncertainty related to infrastructure safety and labor stability adds a significant premium to operating in certain regions of Mexico. This is a direct tax on productivity that Brazil, despite its custom Brazil, doesn't face to the same extent.
And in terms of long-term sustainability, both countries are battling these massive infrastructure deficits.
They absolutely are. For Brazil, the challenge is sheer size. Maintaining and expanding roads, ports, and electricity grids across its vast territory is monumentally expensive, but it's critical to reducing the custom Brazil. For Mexico, the challenge is more about modernization and integration, ensuring that ports, highways, and rail links are seamlessly integrated with the advanced logistics demands of the USMCA market, particularly when it comes to issues like border crossings and digital customs processes.
So stability is really the ultimate metric for both of them. It's built through long-term investment rather than just rapid unchecked growth.
Stability provides the confidence metric. Confidence in consistent policies, confidence in the judicial system, and confidence in the economic path. That encourages businesses to hire, families to save, and investors to commit for decades, not just for months. This focus on consistency and resilience, rather than just chasing the highest annual GDP number, is the key to achieving economic dominance.
So if both countries can navigate these stability challenges, how do they translate their economic scale into strategic regional influence? I mean, leadership is about shaping the agenda, right?
Influence is multifaceted. It involves trade negotiations, infrastructure financing, diplomatic coordination within multinational organizations, and setting standards for economic practices. The country that provides reliable leadership becomes the natural partner and model for its neighbors.
Let's detail Brazil's specific leverage in South America, leveraging its size and its trade alliances.
Brazil's leverage is primarily exercised through its command of Mercosur. By directing Mercosur trade policies, Brazil ensures that it remains the anchor tenant of South American trade. Furthermore, it leverages its natural resource wealth to finance and drive regional infrastructure projects, particularly those related to energy supply and transportation networks that extend into the Amazon basin and connect the Atlantic coast to the Andes. When Brazil's economy is strong, investment flows naturally southward into its neighboring countries.
We also mentioned the OAS. Can you quickly clarify how an organization like that plays into diplomatic influence?
Sure. The Organization of American States, the OAS, is a broader continental forum focused on democracy, security, and diplomacy across the entire Western Hemisphere. Brazil uses its economic weight in this forum to project influence beyond its immediate trade partners, participating in diplomatic efforts and leveraging its status as a major regional power to guide multinational policy on topics ranging from human rights to trade standardization.
Okay, now let's look at Mexico. How does the bridge concept translate into influence beyond just its trade relationship with the U.S.?
Mexico's influence is potentially strengthened by maximizing its role as the economic intermediary. Its highly efficient manufacturing base and strategic access to North American capital allow it to coordinate regional development projects, not just with the U.S., but with Central American nations. For example, Mexico can offer trade integration expertise and industrial stability. It can help guide countries like Guatemala or Honduras on how to modernize their own trade policies and logistics to participate in the lucrative North American supply chains.
So if Brazil is the gravitational center of South America, Mexico is trying to become the gravitational coordinator between North and Central America.
That's the strategic difference right there. Brazil dominates through scale and resources. Mexico influences through integration and efficiency. The future possibilities for both are inherently tied to investing in new age industries, renewable energy infrastructure, advanced digital services, and sophisticated workforce development. The one who captures the next wave of global technology will be the one who sets the regional agenda.
And we can't forget the role of soft power. the cultural and diplomatic footprint.
Soft power is critical for long-term influence. Brazil leverages its global visibility through its culture, its music, its sports, especially soccer, massive international festivals, to build deeper personal and political connections. And Mexico similarly promotes its rich cultural heritage, educational exchange programs, and technology collaborations to increase its own soft power footprint. This cultivation of mutual respect and familiarity is essential for reinforcing economic leadership and creating lasting diplomatic partnerships.
We conclude our deep dive by focusing on the future, sustainability, and the green economy. This is no longer optional, is it? It's a necessary component of global competitiveness and the ultimate determinant of future economic dominance.
That is the highest stakes factor. The global investment community, led by ESG principles, environmental, social, and governance, increasingly funnels capital only into countries that demonstrate clear commitments to sustainability. Nations that invest heavily in renewable energy and efficient resource management are strengthening their growth potential, they're creating new high-value jobs, and they're attracting that critical long-term investment.
Let's just clarify the economic importance of the green economy for our listener. What does that really mean?
The green economy is simply economic activity focused on clean energy, resource efficiency, and minimizing pollution. And sustainability ensures that this growth isn't achieved at the expense of environmental collapse or resource depletion. It guarantees a long-term, stable resource base for industry.
Brazil, given its resources, seems to have an almost unfair advantage here.
Brazil's renewable potential is truly phenomenal. It has large-scale hydropower capacity, massive tracts of land suitable for solar and wind farms, and its pioneering success in using sugarcane for biomass and ethanol production is world-renowned. This offers a path to dramatically reduce reliance on fossil fuels, provide cleaner energy to its massive industrial base, and even export its green technology expertise, particularly to its South American neighbors. This could absolutely cement its regional leadership role as the clean energy provider.
But the downside of that resource wealth is often the pressure on the Amazon and other critical ecosystems. Sustainability is a constant balancing act against powerful resource extraction interests, isn't it?
That is the central tension in Brazil's green transition. Managing resource extraction sustainably, ensuring that agricultural expansion doesn't lead to unchecked deforestation, is an immense political and regulatory challenge. The world watches Brazil's environmental policy very closely, making its credibility in this area directly linked to its ability to attract green investment.
Now, how does Mexico integrate this concept into its export-driven structure? They don't have the same sheer volume of hydro or biomass.
Mexico's opportunity lies in integrating green technology into its manufacturing base and optimizing its vast geographic potential. Its high wind corridors in the south and its immense solar irradiation potential in the north make it ideal for massive renewable energy projects. And critically, Mexico can capitalize on the global shift toward electric vehicle supply chains. By ensuring the energy feeding its automotive factories and its component manufacturers is clean, Mexico maintains its advantage as a competitive and environmentally responsible location for global assembly.
So for Mexico, the goal is not resource dominance, but making its manufacturing process inherently green.
Exactly. It's about optimizing the production process to be energy efficient, to reduce carbon emissions, and to meet the high environmental standards required by the US and European markets. This creates markets for clean technology exports within its existing trade networks, rather than trying to build entirely new resource sectors from scratch.
And this transition for both of them demands a completely new focus on the workforce.
Absolutely. The green economy requires a massive upskilling effort in specialized areas: environmental engineering, sustainable logistics, energy grid management, and solar and wind technology maintenance. Investing in these skills attracts the foreign direct investment associated with the green transition and, crucially, creates the high-quality, long-term jobs necessary for future national competitiveness. The green economy is entirely dependent on the quality of human capital.
And global collaboration is necessary for both to succeed here.
International cooperation, especially accessing climate finance and aligning with global environmental standards, is key. Membership in global climate agreements allows both Brazil and Mexico to integrate environmental standards into their development strategies, ensuring that their exports, whether they be clean energy from Brazil or sustainably manufactured goods from Mexico, are competitive in a global marketplace that is increasingly dominated by green priorities. Hashtag outro, summary and final thought.
This has been a true deep dive into structural economics. We started by defining leadership not just by size, but by stability, influence, and the efficiency of the underlying systems. We've explored the complex interconnected models, Brazil, the powerful, diversified internal focus built on massive resources. Versus Mexico, the highly integrated, export-driven engine centered on the North American supply chain. We've dissected the nuances of GDP, we've understood how structural risks like Custer Brazil or geopolitical dependence impact daily life, and recognized that workforce productivity and stability are the ultimate determinants of success.
We can reinforce those key contrasts one last time. Brazil's strength comes from its resources and internal demand, focusing innovation on vast processes and self-sufficiency. Mexico's strength comes from its location and its efficiency in assembly and logistics, focusing innovation on speed and quality control within global networks. Both are regional giants, and their future influence will be powered by how successfully they integrate technology and address their unique structural challenges. Political volatility for Brazil, security costs for Mexico. And remember, the skills of the people are what drive the productivity that strengthens the entire economy.
We've seen that both countries have the potential to define the economic future of Latin America, especially regarding that critical path of the green economy. But their path to dominance is fundamentally determined by their unique geography and economic structure.
And this is the critical juncture for future analysis. We've laid out their industrial structures, their trade integrations, and their environmental endowments. So let's leave you with a final provocative thought for your own critical analysis. Based on all we have discussed regarding long-term structural resilience, trade integration, and resource availability, which country, Brazil, with its vast resource abundance and internal focus, or Mexico, with its deep integration into the world's most dynamic trade bloc via North America, is better positioned to translate its sustainability potential into measurable, long-term economic dominance and stability in Latin America over the next decade? This requires you to forecast which structural model is more adaptable to the rapid demands of a changing global economy.